I can see the people who I've been texting jumping on, so that's a good sign. All right, I might kick off, I think. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your patience with Zoom not doing what Zoom told us it was doing. Just to be clear and to give Brooke all the assurances, we did upgrade our account so that this wouldn't happen. All the best laid plans, but that's life, isn't it? Particularly when we're relying on tech. So thank you again for your patience, and let's kick off. For those of you who I haven't met, I don't know, there's probably still some people out there I haven't met who, who are out there at councils. My name's Alicia Vasilangos. I am the Executive Officer of the LGEA and our Principal Industrial Officer. I've been working for the union for too long, really, to mention at this point. But a big part of my role is negotiating the terms and conditions of employment every 3 years as part of the state award. This is, I want to say, maybe my fifth award that I've done, but certainly I've been at this negotiating table for several years now. And my job today is to take you through the offer that we've received from LGNSW as a proposal to finalise the dispute around the existing state award. And so what I plan to do today is to run you through an overview of the key changes contained within the state award offer. Then we're going to do a voting link. There'll be a QR code. Members will also be emailed with a link and their membership number. A reminder that only union members get to vote on whether to accept or reject the award. So if you're not a member, you're not able to have a say as to whether or not the award should be accepted. Obviously, the LGA members are running our vote. That voting link will be open for a week. The other unions, I don't know deep processes, but I know the USU are going through site meetings at the moment, council by council. So all of that is rolling along. Once we have the outcome of the vote, we will communicate that with members, and then I'll talk about the next steps towards the end of my slides. We'll also, at the very end of the meeting, get people's views on delegate training. So we've got a QR code for a quick little survey for members of ours who might be interested in doing some delegate training with us, just trying to get together our schedule for the next sort of 6 to 12 months. So if you can complete that as well, that would be great. A little bit of housekeeping. If you could keep yourself on mute, that would be great. If you have questions around any of the provisions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to try and deal with them sort of topic by topic, because otherwise it's really confusing if we get to the end of the slideshow and we have a question about one of the first things that we got to. So yeah, if you have a question, pop it in the chat. I'll give an opportunity for questions before we move on to each thing. LGEA team, if there are questions in the chat that you can answer, feel free to pop those answers straight in. And if there's something I need to know about in the chat, just let me know, because I don't have that up on my little screen at the moment. All right, so let's start with where we are and how we've gotten to here. So we surveyed our members in July last year following the final increase under the current award, or July, August. Then we put together our log of claims. We ran a membership offer. We exchanged our logs with LGNSW and the other unions in October. And on the 28th of April, we received an offer to finalise the award. Now, what that doesn't really tell you is all of the things that have happened between October and April. And certainly this year has been an extremely resource-intensive negotiation. We have had, I think, 13 separate sessions of conciliation before Commissioner Howell of the Industrial Relations Commission, who has assisted us in finalising outstanding issues. And we've also been meeting probably weekly since the end of January. So a huge amount of time and effort has gone into getting to the offer that we have now received. It hasn't been the easiest of negotiations, but it is also an odd negotiation, because what I found when I sat down to put these slides together is that there was a lot of work on some very key topics, but it probably this proposed award doesn't probably have the volume of change that we have seen, particularly in the last one in 2023. That being said, the changes that we do have are fairly significant. And so I think probably the quantum of change is not as great, but some of the impacts will be significant. And it has been a very hard fought negotiation. So last week, I think it was last week, I took the LGA Committee of Management through the offer from LGNSW, and the Committee of Management endorsed the offer and passed a motion that the offer be put to LGA members for consideration and a vote. And so that's what has led to us being here today. As a reminder, so as I said earlier, we surveyed our members in July, August to determine bargaining priorities for the award, and these were the order of priorities that members gave us. So number one priority from LGA members was better remuneration. The second priority was work-life balance around additional leave, flexible work, working from home, etc. Then there was maintenance of key terms and conditions of employment, job security, and then continued professional development. This is always a really helpful sort of exercise, and if you are a delegate particularly, and you've been to any of the delegate webinars that we've run throughout the negotiation process, you'll know that I always refer back to this. This is kind of like my guiding compass as I go through these negotiations to make sure that the things that we're prioritizing in those discussions match up with our members' priorities that they have been telling us they want us to pursue. The other thing that is another helpful thing, has been a particularly helpful reference point for me, is to look at what an average LGA member looks like. This has been particularly important when we've looked at things like parental leave. But what we know about our members is that the majority of LGA members are Band 3, Level 3. Most are employed under the state award, though we still would have some members employed under existing senior staff contracts that are going to reach their expiry date, or GMs. We still have a majority male membership, though we do have a growing proportion of female members. Our average member age has actually decreased, which is really positive because we know that as an industry, we need to continue to attract and retain young professionals to those technical professional roles. And again, most of our members are still engineers, though we do cover obviously a broad range of technical professionals within New South Wales local government. So with all of that background information in mind, let's go through the nuts and bolts of it all. Let's talk about pay first, because it's the number one priority. Industry remuneration data, we tend to map award increases against the other key factors in terms of pay, I suppose, in local government, and that is CPI. Everyone talks about CPI when they're judging whether or not a pay increase fits the bill for obvious reasons. The other thing that we refer to, and is an exercise that I go through before the negotiations commence every time we do the award, is the rate peg. And interestingly, a few different unions took this same approach where we sort of mapped out CPI rate peg and award over the last sort of, that's a typo, by the way, that's 2025, not 2015. But over the last 10 plus years to see, could we make an argument that rate peg is higher and, we haven't kept pace, or CPI is higher and award increases haven't kept pace. Very interestingly, when I sat down and calculated all of those figures over the last sort of 12 plus years, what I found is that they were almost within 0.5%, exactly the same. So you can see on this chart here that there are years where the award increase is sort of significantly higher than CPI and the rate peg. Then there are years where it drops below CPI, certainly. But what happened was, when we sort of calculated it out across the entire period, they've pretty much kept pace with each other, give or take. So it's just a helpful reference point. I don't think anyone in this virtual room is unaware of the current CPI figures and the fact that cost of living is going through the roof at the moment. That's certainly not what was projected. And it's been an incredibly challenging time to try and negotiate pay in because the pay offer in February, March looked pretty good. And then obviously, little old war happened and everything has kind of gone a little bit nuts. That being said, we can only operate within the sort of confines of the information that we have available, and we also have to take into account capacity to pay from councils. Certainly in local government, it's a really fine line between achieving a fair and reasonable pay increase for employees and not having a pay increase that is so excessive that it will see some councils actually no longer be financially sustainable. And whilst most councils are not in that category, there is a growing cohort that are pretty much on a knife's edge. And so that was a factor, certainly from the LGNSW board when determining how much they would agree to pay. There's also been additional cost shifts that have happened only in the last probably month. So councils, we're aware that councils are, up against quite a bit in terms of costs, particularly from things like the supply chain, pay stuff that's as a result of the transport changes at the Fair Work level. What we know, what we think we know, this is probably the more accurate way to put it, is that actual outcomes, wage growth versus inflation, I'm just going to have to move my little thing so I can see. As I said, back in February, the 4% looked really good. We know CPI has peaked. We also know that the forecasts are that while CPI has peaked now, all of the evidence and advice that we have sought is that that is going to be a temporary thing. And you can see that in this Reserve Bank forecast. You can also see the wage price index growth where it's sitting. It's around the sort of 3.5 in the public sector, almost 4, but not quite. So in terms of outcomes of other bargained agreements, the pay offer is pretty competitive with anything we've seen within certainly LGEA and then more broadly Professionals Australia. So the pay offer under this existing award, the proposed award, is 12%, 4% on or after the first pay period on or after 1 July, 4% again in 2027, and 4% again in 2028. There are no additional payments. So some members might recall that in 2023 award, we also had these additional award payments that were sort of a one-off thing. They were non-compounding. We didn't want to go down that path this time. We prefer a higher overall general increase. And the best one that we could achieve at that negotiating table is 444. This was the last thing that we were able to resolve. We explored every opportunity we had available to us as bargainers to try and get a higher increase. And unfortunately, their willingness from the LGNSW board to do anything above 12 was just not there. And so the pay offer under the proposed award is 4%, 4%, 4%. Are there any questions on pay that I should talk to? And see lots of chat. Yes, Carlo, you're right. It is a higher general increase. That's certainly the position from LGNSW. I think that's everything here. Chris asked what figure we asked for. We don't have a pattern of asking for numbers. I always ask for reasonable increases. I don't like to show my cards when I negotiate these things, certainly not with pay. The final sort of line that we got to, we were hoping we could get to 13. And yeah, unfortunately, we had some assurances that that might go ahead, and at the last minute it fell through, and 12% was all that people were willing to put in the offer. Okay, I'm going to move on from pay now. If I can I've got so many little boxes popping up. Apologies. Okay, so next, parental leave. This is another big one. And please bear with me because it's just a little bit complicated. So the proposed new award contains a complete change to the way parental leave is offered under the local government state award. So currently, there is an existing make-up pay scheme where council continues to maintain your wage by paying the difference between the federal minimum wage of $948 a week and whatever your salary is. So they pay the top bit, and they top it up to whatever the federal paid parental leave entitlement is. So that's currently 22 weeks. So under the current award, it's 22 weeks of paid parental leave for the primary caregiver, but that is using your entitlement from the federal government. So the federal government offers Australian employees 22 weeks per year at $948 per week. And at the moment, a council pays the difference. We're moving away from the top-up scheme, which I'm really pleased about because it's administratively difficult and complex, and it's also messy in that it relies on that entitlement to the federal government paid parental leave scheme. Under the proposed award, there is now a 14-week standalone parental leave entitlement. 14 weeks paid parental leave on your current salary. And that is for any parent. You do not need to be the primary carer of the child to access that entitlement. It's available at any time within that first 24 months of a child's life. So you can take some time off at birth, and then you can take some time off when maybe a partner might go back to work later on. You can take it in single days. It's a flexible type of leave, which is really very positive for families who might work in flexible ways, and you might want to take, a day a week and support another partner. It's also available to both employees. So where both employees work at the same council, employees can be off at 4 weeks concurrently, then they need to be off at separate times. But that entitlement is 14 weeks for each employee, regardless of whether they're a primary carer. What that means is you also then have your separate entitlement from the federal government of 22 weeks at the $948 a week. Now, I spoke earlier about how it got messy with parental leave and needing to refer back to the demographics. On my maths, some of our members who are earning in those higher brackets may find that they are better off under the existing 22-week top-up scheme. And that sort of kicks in around the $3,000 a week mark. And it is based on the assumption that you would have taken the full 22 weeks from the federal government, so your partner wouldn't be accessing that. But if you were going to take 22 weeks at the top-up scheme, the full 22 weeks, and you earn more than $3,000 a week, then financially, on my maths, you're better off under the top-up scheme. Why am I saying all of this? Well, this was an oddly specific sticking point in the negotiations, and there was a real unwillingness to maintain existing conditions for our high paid professionals within the industry. And I was not willing to have an outcome where some LGA members benefited and others ended up with potentially less. And so after some fairly strong heel digging in on our behalf, we've been able to achieve a maintenance of the existing 22-week top-up scheme for employees who choose to go down that path, or the 14 weeks under the existing the proposed new paid parental leave scheme. So basically, it's a really long way of saying you have a choice for this proposed new award for the next 3 years. You can either take the top-up scheme as it exists, or you can take the new entitlement. And what we would say to all of our members who are looking at having a child in the next 3 years, and we know that that's a fair proportion of our membership because we've surveyed, please get some advice before you determine what type of leave you are going to take, and make sure you do your maths. And yeah, look, I think ultimately, this is a really positive outcome. Anything that means that parents get more time at home with their child, that parents can be off work together at the time of birth is a really positive thing for families and also for work-life balance more specifically. And so I'm really proud that we've been able to achieve this provision. One thing I will say, because I've had a few emails about it already, unfortunately, this new scheme only applies to babies born, adopted, or placed in a family on or after 1 July this year. So if you're fortunate enough to be expecting a little person in the next couple of months, unfortunately, this probably won't apply to you, but it will apply to babies born on or after 1 July. Hopefully that was as clear as mud. I can see some questions in the chat. Anything I should address? Now is the time. Oh, I've already answered that question. There's a question about citizenship. Um, bit late for me too, Phil. Someone did joke I should have another child, and but yeah, my husband left. So, no. In terms of citizenship, the only test for the local government award provisions is around employment. So, if you've got service, there's no question around citizenship. That will apply to your ability to claim the federal minimum wage 22-week entitlement, but certainly from the awards perspective, it just applies to local government employees regardless of citizenship status. Yes, so there's a question about the 2 weeks, so that's a good point. Under the current award, there is a provision for concurrent parental leave, which is 2 weeks that comes from someone's sick leave. That is done away with under this proposal because you get 14 weeks, which I think is probably better. So, yeah, no more of the 2 weeks from your sick leave. And at the federal level, that provision of leave was also done away with because it's moved into that broader bucket of 22 weeks per child, and that will increase, I think, to 26 weeks fairly soon. You can see the chat. Yeah, I've already carried that, Gary. So this provisions only apply for children born on or after 1 July. No, parental leave can't be cashed out. Parents don't get 22 weeks per child, they get 14 weeks under the local government award provision. The federal government provision is 22 weeks, but that is per child, not per person. So you can share that, you can do whatever you want with that. And the reason that's the exact reason why we've tried to move away from this top-up scheme because it gets really complicated when we're talking about sharing a bucket. So your 22 weeks provision from the federal government at $948 a week, that is a separate entitlement. It's per child. The state award applies per employee, and that is 14 weeks. Yes, 14 weeks per parent per child. There is a requalification period. And yes, it applies to both primary or secondary care. In fact, there's no such thing anymore. That terminology doesn't even exist. All right, we might move on. Hopefully that is clear. If you do have specific questions, I encourage you to reach out to your delegates in your workplaces or send an email through to the LGEA team. We'll move on to the next topic, which is equally simple. So this has been the other really, really big topic in this negotiation, and this is a new type of leave slash not really, but kind of called My Leave. So under the current state award, you get 15 days of sick leave per year. That's 5 days more than the federal minimum provisions that apply to most employees. But there was feedback from some people that they don't tend to access all of their sick leave. There was a lot of requests around additional leave entitlements. Ultimately, where we've landed is something called My Leave. So it's probably easier to just talk about what changes. Under this proposal, sick leave stays at 3 weeks for local government employees who work in early childhood family daycare because they work in germ factories. The remaining local government employees get just 2 weeks of sick leave, but they get 5 days or 1 week of my leave per year. What else changes for sick leave? There is a removal of the requirement to provide a medical certificate. At the moment, it's after 3 single-day absences, you have to provide a medical certificate. You no longer have that requirement. Basically, it can be requested where an employee has a pattern of taking significant amounts of sick leave or there's some concern raised. If that happens, an employee's manager may say, from now on, I'm going to ask that you provide a medical certificate if you're taking sick leave. But without that conversation and without that requirement communicated to you, there is no longer a requirement to get medical certificate proof when taking sick leave. There's also some changes around who an employee can take carers leave for, but those changes really are just sort of administrative and to modernise the language. The last thing that's changed is the removal of health and wellbeing leave, and that is because my leave sort of is designed to do what that is. Health and wellbeing leave was always taken from your sick leave entitlement anyway, so that was 2 days. Now, effectively, what we have is 5 days of something like health and wellbeing leave, but with a lot less rigor around notification requirements. So what's my leave? My leave is 5 days per year that you can use however you like. You can use it as annual leave, you can use it as sick leave, you can use it as a mental health day, you can have it however you like. It doesn't accumulate or accrue each year. And it isn't paid out on termination. So the idea is you have 5 days a year to use however you like. If you just want to use them as sick leave and you don't have the capacity to take additional leave on top of your flex leave and your leave long service leave, you can make the request to have that leave convert back into your sick leave. It's really important that members are aware of that because at this stage, councils are not agreeing to have an automatic conversion process. So when you reach the end of your anniversary year, a month before you hit that point, you need to make the request to your council to convert it into sick leave if you haven't used it. We're going to work with councils on that because it is just, they're not allowed to unreasonably refuse that request, or, well, I can't imagine on what basis they could ever refuse it. So it's almost like there is an automatic conversion, except that you have to request it each year. We're going to do what we can to try and encourage councils individually to just make it automatic conversion. I imagine most councils will think that this is an unnecessarily difficult administrative burden to go through a tick and flick process for every employee who has the right to have it converted anyway. So I'm hopeful that eventually by the end of this award, conversion to sick leave would just be an automatic process. But at this stage, it does need to be requested by the employee. Yeah, so I guess in a scenario, I'll apply it to myself. I have now, it's the start of my anniversary year, I now have 2 weeks of sick leave and then I have 1 week of my leave. I wake up and think I can't face my work today. I need to take a mental health day. I need to go and sit in a sauna and go to the gym and stare at some trees for a bit, touch grass, whatever. I can take that leave. You don't have to have proof. You don't even really need to give a reason. They ask that you can give advance notice, but it's there to be used in that way. You can also tack it on the end of your annual leave. You can tack it on to Christmas shutdown, all of those sorts of things. But the idea is that it's meant to be a flexible pot of leave for people to use. The idea is that it's meant to be unlocking sick leave for employees who might not use it, but for those employees who want to make sure that they keep their sick leave balance the way that it is currently accumulating, you still have that right to request it. Before I take questions on this, I'll also just quickly point out that there are transitional arrangements in place for the next 12 months under the proposed award because it's an anniversary date entitlement, so it's realised on an employee's anniversary each year. That means from 1 July 2026 until 1 July 2027, if your anniversary is in July or August this year, you get 1 day of my leave. If your anniversary is in September, October, you get two. If your anniversary is in November, December, you get three. If your anniversary is in January or February, you get four. And if your anniversary is in March to June, you will get five. If you're a part-time employee, you'll get a transitional entitlement to my leave on the basis above that. And then those transitional entitlements will cease, obviously, once we get through to that second anniversary year of my leave. So, simple. What have I got in the chat? 24. I'm going to skip through the CPD stuff because I think I've answered that question, Henry. Is it reset? So it's anniversary year. It's not per financial year, so let's be really clear. Your entitlement to my leave is based on your individual employee anniversary. My anniversary with PA is June. So at June each year or in May, I should be going, or I haven't used all my leave. I'm going to ask to have that converted into sick leave. And that is when the next June rolls around, I'll get my next entitlement.
A question from the chat, Alicia, if I may jump in. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the anniversary date for those who've
Mm-hmm.
worked at multiple different councils in their career, so gone from workplace to workplace, is the anniversary date from when they started working for local government or the specific organization?
With their organization. Anniversary date is always based on who you're employed by, except if there's continuity of service for long service leave. But even then, it's still your anniversary date with that employer. Um, no, annual leave can only be taken in as single day, single pay, so it can't be taken at half or double pay. Yes, it can be taken as an RDO next to RDO or annual leave without a certificate. The idea is that councils made access to health and wellbeing leave so administratively difficult and had such high burdens on employees to only use it for sick leave appointments, those sorts of things, that no one was using it. And the whole point behind health and wellbeing leave was to encourage people to take that break and to disconnect from work in periods of high stress rather than trying to push through and the inevitable happening. So the idea is similar behind my leave, is that it's there to be used flexibly when you need it. Is it reset? No. So I think I'm just reading through these questions. I can't read them all out because there's 20. I'm just trying to address the ones that I can reasonably answer. I feel like a lot of them have been covered. There's a question here about whether or not we can utilize our health and wellbeing leave days before July. Absolutely. That's an existing entitlement under the current award. If you want to use them, you can. But please remember that they are just from your sick leave balance. So that's not an additional pot of leave. If you don't use them, you don't lose the days, they just stay as sick leave days. Luke has a question here. Is there a chance that the removal of medical certificate requirement could be interpreted as a removal of the 2 to 3 free occurrences? So you need a medical certificate every time you ask. That is why they introduced my leave. No, there's no, it doesn't even reference medical certificates anymore in the award, other than to say um, you can take these are the instances where a medical certificate can be required, and it's only where there has been prior notification from a supervisor or manager, and that is on the basis of there has been a pattern and a high taking of sick leave. Brendan has asked, how does that impact fully paid sick leave on termination? There are very, very few people still working in the industry that have retained access to payment of sick leave on termination because that was prohibited under the 1993 Act. But if in those instances, I'm really happy to give people those individual pieces of advice. And ultimately, the short answer is if you would prefer to retain that as sick leave, just keep banking it as sick leave. The quantum of leave doesn't change, it's just broken into two buckets now. There's a question around from Parissa around transferring of leave. So under the current award, you can transfer up to 13 weeks of sick leave to a newly employing council. There's no change to that provision. So that will continue to be the thing. I guess the question is, does that mean on the 10 days per year as opposed to 2 weeks? It's a good question. I don't think we've had that conversation in the negotiations. I would assume that that means it carries over on the new entitlement of 10 days per year. But I'm very happy to ask that question when I meet with the award parties tomorrow to see if we need to change anything in the drafting. There's so many more. I'm just conscious. I feel like a lot of these have been answered. I think I might move on now because I feel like we're going to run out of time otherwise. Um, but if there's anything urgent, please send me an email or reach out to your delegate or reach out to members of the team. Cars obviously has been a fairly hot topic of late with fuel prices. We sought to bring in some more rigor around um, where an employer proposes to increase leaseback fees by more than the ABS relevant statistic. And what we now have in the proposed award is that a requirement for reasons for variations to leaseback fees to provide sufficient detail to explain the rationale for the increase. We've also retained leave reserve for award variation around leaseback vehicles and also EVs. Obviously, with the changing sort of FBT treatment, certainly of EVs, it's important for us to continue to have the ability to amend or vary the award to reflect changes in practice. Vehicle allowance increases. So obviously, there's been a number of members who've reached out with concerns around that being no longer an appropriate amount given the increases in fuel. There was a Splinter Award application that we supported several weeks ago, which is still a live matter before Commissioner Howell, for a loading to be paid on vehicle allowances. That has not gone ahead at this point because what is happening at the federal level is that there is a special case where there's been an application to bring forward the variations to the federal vehicle allowances. That federal modern award vehicle allowances is what feeds through to the variations to the state award. That is the mechanism that exists for us because there's a sort of a logic set on that figure across the country, and that is what then changes. So when there's a change at that federal level, that then filters through an award variation to the local government state award. Those hearing dates are set down for the 15th and the 18th of May. So we expect to know, we expect that there will be an increase to the vehicle allowance by the end of May. We don't know what that will look like, but that will pass through to the existing award if it happens under the current award or through to the proposed new award. But there was no willingness from LGNSW to apply any loadings under the current fuel crisis. Just looking through the chat. Although leaseback novated leases should be more available, leasebacks usually have requirements like certain grade. Is there any work being done for that? So there's a question around access to leaseback vehicles. Unfortunately, so many things, you can only sort of mandate certain things within a state award that applies to a range of councils of very varying sizes. So there's nothing that we can mandate within the award around access to a leaseback vehicle. That's something that has to be done on a council by council basis. No, I think that's all. Any other questions on is there a general value of what a leaseback vehicle is to an employee? There's no agreed quantified value, but there's certainly where a council wants you to return your vehicle, that can only be done by agreement. So um, people can negotiate what allowance might be paid if there were to be a return of a vehicle. If an employee wanted to enter into a novated lease, that really does depend on the policy and procedure in place at your individual council. I know there are some councils out there that don't offer car allowances or vehicle allowances. They prefer to provide a leaseback vehicle. Ultimately, with all of these things, I strongly encourage you all to get financial advice when you're tossing up, certainly between, say, a leaseback vehicle or a novated lease. It's an ever-changing situation and one I'm certainly not qualified to give advice on. We're going through the same process at the moment in our family, but it's something to weigh up. Whether or not you have the right to a vehicle allowance really does depend on a council by council basis. And if you have a question about that, I would encourage you to reach out to your delegate or to your relevant LGEA official as well. I'm going to move on now to the next one. Term contracts. So this is another issue that has been a fairly regular one for us and our members. We have seen a fairly frequent practice of some councils rolling out rolling term contracts where employees have very limited sort of employment security under a standard term contract, and especially in situations where funding might be for an extended period of time, but the contract might only be for 12 months. It's always been our position that if there is a role at council that has been created or there is a term contract applied to that role, but that role continues to get renewed, it's a pretty strong argument to suggest that that role should be a permanent position within council. And so we wanted to bring in some more rigor around when term contracts are to be issued, because it is a practice that we see increasingly used in not a positive way for our members. We've retained leave reserve within the award to vary the terms around term contracts if we would like. But what we've also achieved is a joint statement that has been put together with LGNSW and the award parties, with some fairly significant drafting assistance from the LGEA team. And what that document does, and will be circulated to every council when the proposed award is made, if it is made, it contains a range of circumstances when it is appropriate to offer a term contract and when it is not. And it specifically calls out practices like if a job is a temporary role tied to temporary funding, then the length of the contract offer should reflect the length of the funding. So if you've got a 4-year funding model, your contract should be a 4-year contract. It shouldn't be 4 1-year contracts. So I'm quite hopeful that that document will assist us in resolving some issues for members in these situations. And we are going to work more broadly with the award parties around ensuring compliance to the existing award provisions and determining if any changes need to happen on the provisions of the award following some more, I guess, oversight of how these contracts are issued. Any other questions on that one? Oh, my chat box keeps popping down. Okay, that's fine. We will move to the next one. AI in the workplace. This was an oddly difficult topic to have discussions around. When I say we, I mean all 3 of the unions wanted to bring in some protections for employees around the introduction of AI in the workplace. That was resisted quite significantly from the employers. After going back and forth a lot, what we have managed to do is to introduce, I guess, 2 very clear consultative mechanisms within the award around the introduction to AI. The first one is under the scope of the consultative committee. So LGEA delegates who are their rep on the consultative committee at their workplace will have oversight and be consulted on the benefits and challenges of any adoption of any AI technologies in the workplace. So we have the opportunity to influence and be consulted around the consideration of adoption of those AI technologies. And then at the end of the award, when we talk about workplace change, there is again a reference made to clarify that major change, i.e., when an employer needs to consult with unions and the employees around workplace change, one of those definitions, one of those clear circumstances is where changes arising from the adoption of AI systems technologies impacts a workplace, where there is workplace change as a result of that. So what this does is it gives us an opportunity to have oversight over when it is introduced and then what happens if the introduction of it then impacts potentially people's positions. So really tricky space for us to try and ring fence around because we know that this is changing all the time. And we wanted to have the right to be consulted before anything is introduced. We got resistance from councils who were saying, well, my Outlook just updated everyone to have Copilot. Should I have consulted the union around that? So it is a constantly changing and emerging space. We felt it was still very, very important to make sure that there was some mention and specific sort of points within the award where it was very clear that there needed to be consultation. And I think the outcome where we've landed, where we've got introductions at both the consideration of adoption and then where that workplace change might occur, is a really good way of ring fencing it as best we can. Any questions on that? There's a question. No, that's about when the document will be circulated. That document will be uploaded when you get the vote link at the end of today's webinar. Grievance and disputes. So the one concession that the unions agreed to in the current award, or the proposed award, sorry, is to have extended time to meet to respond to a formal grievance notification. Currently, under the current award, an employer is supposed to meet with people within 2 days of a formal grievance notification. That's now been extended to 5 days. The reason for that is it really was never really occurring within 2 days, or very rarely occurring within 2 days anyway. It was an easy concession for us to make. Obviously, that is something that we will always prioritise, but it has not been an issue for LGA members. Basically, employers were concerned that they could be sued for breach of the award because they weren't meeting within that 2-day period. And so we've agreed to an extension from 2 days to 5 days. What also has been introduced is an additional requirement to then meet again within 5 days if the matter remains unresolved. Previously, that just said as soon as practicable. That was not occurring, I think, in a very regular systemic way. And so this is actually a win for us, is that now there is a time frame around a second meeting if the matter remains unresolved. There's an ability for us to agree to an extension of those timeframes, and of course, none of this can change requirements to address matters where they're related to safety. That is governed by the relevant legislation. So not a huge change, I would imagine, for LGEA members. Union rights. So every new employee is issued with a local government employee information statement. We've revised the drafting around that to provide clarity around delegates' rights and roles within that. There's also now an obligation for councils to notify the relevant unions of the date of new employee inductions and allow for an authorised industrial officer to have an opportunity to attend premises and hold discussions with new employees. So this is an opportunity for us to meet with new starters at a council right when they commence. It's probably something that we will utilise our wonderful delegates to assist with. This happens already at some councils, but not all. This was an important win to make sure that we still get the opportunity to talk to people when they're first commencing their employment journey with a council. There's also some changes around ensuring that union deductions are forwarded to unions in a timely manner because we had some issues with that occurring as well. Workplace flexibility. We've consolidated the flexibility for work and phase retirement clauses, so that's now contained within the one clause. They simply just repeated each other, and we found that some members were having issues with having their requests for phase retirement, workplace flexibility just ignored or not properly addressed. So now, having all of it contained within the one clause, we've also introduced a time frame. So an employer must respond to a flexible work request within 28 days. The proposed award also states that where there is a failure to respond, that failure to respond may be used as proof that the refusal is unreasonable. So we hope that that will bring in some additional, I guess, rights to have your request for flexible work heard and responded to in a timely manner and not unreasonably refused. Oh, I think that, did that go back too? No. Award Implementation Committee. This is I think the final piece. This is a new provision, something that we used to have many, many years ago and hasn't existed. But given the breadth of the change, and particularly to some fairly common workplace practices around sort of sick leave, my leave, the changing landscape around AI, EVs, vehicles more generally, what we've established is an award implementation committee. That is just an opportunity for us to have oversight on how these things are rolled out across the industry, and also allows us to influence the way things are rolled out, the advice that's given around implementation of new provisions, and to troubleshoot, problem shoot any issues as they arise. So we obviously have the leave reserve provisions to amend the award where necessary, and this award implementation committee will sort of feed through to if that is ever required by meeting regularly on topics like AI, EVs, term contracts, and my leave implementation, and any other matter that we deem necessary. So, what are the next steps? The next steps, that's the award offer in a nutshell, or rather big shell. What I will say is, and I said this at the start, it has been an incredibly lengthy, resource-intensive negotiation. We've taken extraordinary steps in this negotiation. We've requested meetings with the LGNSW committee to try and influence their decision making. We've had more appearances before the commission than I've ever seen in terms of an award negotiation. And I'm here today talking to you and presenting to you with the best possible offer that I have been able to achieve at that negotiating table. Now it's up to you. So we've put the offer to you as endorsed by the LGEA Committee of Management, and you get to decide whether or not you wish to vote to accept or reject the proposed award as outlined. The vote will commence now online. It'll be open for a week. The vote is only open to union members, so only members can vote on whether or not to accept or reject the proposed award. If members vote to accept, and if members of the other unions do the same, there is a listing scheduled before Commissioner Howell of the Industrial Relations Commission on the 16th of June for the making of the award, and the award would come into force on or from 1 July, 30 June. And obviously pay increases, etc., all occur once that date is reached. So up on the screen now, we have a QR code link to the LGA member vote portal. You will need your membership number to vote. Brooke, when does that email go?
Yeah, so the email, as soon as this webinar finishes, I'm going to send out an SMS that will contain your membership number and the link to vote. And then you will also receive an email with the link to vote, a copy of the proposed award, and your membership number. So couple of minutes after this webinar concludes, you'll start to receive those SMS and email.
That's great. Thank you. So before we finish up, I'm just going to very quickly also bring up on the screen one more QR code, and this is for delegate training. So we're in the process of setting dates for our next round of delegate training. We're also looking at different things that we could offer in terms of our delegate training offering. So, if you are a delegate or you're not, but you might like to be, please scan the QR code that's up on the screen now. There's a very short form there. It will just allow us to make sure that we are scheduling in appropriate amount of training for the people who are interested. So I encourage you to do that. And if you're interested in getting more involved as a delegate in your workplace, please let us know. I think now is a really important time for me to just remind everyone that the LGEA team there's only sort of five or six of us. There's a lot of councils and there's a lot of you. We can only be as effective as we are through our incredible network of LGA delegates who we've been able to meet with and consult with throughout this negotiation process, and certainly allows us to have eyes and ears on the ground in all of the 130 odd councils in New South Wales. Make sure that we're not missing anything, and helps us hear all of your individual voices all across the state. So thank you to our incredible network of LGA delegates, and more broadly, thank you to our LGA membership. Throughout this award, we've had some curly questions come up, and we've had to run some fairly frequent last-minute surveys. And it is not ever lost on me how lucky we are to represent such a group of engaged and passionate members who are willing to take the time to provide us with feedback on topics that matter to you. But your feedback and your engagement helps me then use your voices in negotiations. And those of you who've done a survey around parental leave intentions, around leasebacks, contributed to the stuff around the federal inquiry about local government funding, please know that I'm using your voices in every room that I'm in. I'm reading your quotes, I'm sharing the data that you provide, and I'm very, very grateful for all of your engagement. This is only possible through all of you. So thank you very much, and thank you for jumping on today. I think that's it. Are there any other questions in the chat? I have no idea if I've gone over time. If I have, I'm sorry. Cool. Thanks, everyone.